do we embrace our vulnerability, and that's as women. And if you're thinking to yourself, I'm not a woman, we still encourage you to have the mental model to know that you have a woman that might be in your life that needs to hear this information. So we encourage you to stay very open and flexible in this conversation as we get very narrow and talk about Black women specifically, and think about the buttress that it has to your own life and your own community.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
It is such an honor and a pleasure to be here. I am just very emotional because this is just a culmination of a lot of life work. And I'm just pleased to be here. And thank you so much, Dr. Nadia, for putting this whole thing on. My name is Dr. Stephanie Evans. I'm chair of African American Studies, Africana Women Studies, and History at Clark Atlanta University. And I am an intellectual historian. So I encourage everyone to create a haiku about their work. My haiku is this: Black women's ideas can help solve global problems. At least they solved mine. And the idea of problem-solving research and looking to Black women's history and intellectual history in particular is how I came to this work of mental health. So we ask in applied history, what does your research do? We are looking at historical narratives, and we all know that if you do not study history, you're doomed to repeat it. And so in studying history, I was always attracted to Black women's ideas and memoirs and life narratives. And so there's a collection of, if you go to professorevans.net, which is my website, that's all of my work there, but there's a collection of Black women's life narratives and talking about who they are, their life stories. There's over 500 published narratives from around the world. And so when reaching a certain level of my work, saying, okay, well, what does this knowledge do? What do Black women's memoirs and life stories and autobiographies do? I started to think about the application of intellectual history for mental health. So we'll get into more of that later, but I basically did a national search for who was doing Black women's mental health research and work and as a practitioner, and I reached out to Dr. Kanika Bell, and I said, I don't know anything about mental health, but I'd really like to create this collaboration, and so the discussion grew, which we'll talk about the book later in our discussion, to include Dr. Nasinga Burton, who is a media scholar, and talks about how representation, Black women are represented. So Black women's mental health is an extension of intellectual history and a discussion of 15 chapters, about 30 scholars from different disciplines talking about these very questions about how to balance strength and vulnerability from our disciplinary perspectives and in our own work. Hi, everybody. I am Dr. Kanika Bell. I like to call myself a scholar activist. I think I'm resisting this term academician, but that's what I think I do. I'm also a licensed clinical and forensic psychologist. I have a practice in Atlanta. So it was interesting to be part of this project because I like to think about Black women's mental health kind of theoretically, but I also do it, I practice it. And so my chapter in the book actually is collecting data from Black female mental health practitioners. I found 50 fantastic Black women who treat Black women and asked them about the challenges they think that Black women face in their process, their journey towards achieving optimal mental health, and then what are the techniques that work with this population. Because what we found is, though we can borrow some things from African-centered psychology models, they completely ignore the impact of patriarchy and misogyny. And though we can borrow some things from the feminist ideologies, they often ignore poverty and specific race-related issues to women of color. And so I myself couldn't really find too many things that were out there that were specifically, this is a technique to work with Black women. Right? We're missing as individuals from that discourse. And so what I found in these women, the participants in my study,
is that they were kind of practicing in womanism, but not calling it that, right? They were actually kind of making this womanist therapy model work, but they weren't necessarily calling it that. And so I'm really excited about this discussion today. I really want to make sure that we also know that when we are talking about Black women, we are inclusive, right? Trans women, whoever we're talking about, this is an inclusive space to talk about women who experience multiple levels of oppression, right? Lots of different, women are experiencing these kind of multiple layered levels of oppression, and that impacts us differently. And so with my particular work, of course, like I said, I have a practice and I work with individuals. I find myself in my clients. And so this has been personally healing for me, right? To write about something that I'm not only dealing with in terms of sitting across the couch, for my clients, but my own personal stories, right, come out in this and also come out in dealing with my clients. And I think it's important to note, as I pass the microphone on, that this is important for anybody working with this population. I will vulnerably state that my own therapist is white and 65 years old. Fantastic. She is fantastic, right? I mean, she gets me, right? But there's a way that she became familiar with my struggle and story so that she could treat me appropriately, and that I really appreciated. And we were able to make and continue this relationship regardless of her ability to, it's not empathy, right? Because it's not necessarily that she has the same struggles, but the way that she has dedicated time to understand me as her client. And so that's why I'm glad to see a multitude of faces, because this is not just for Black women. This is just about Black women. And anyone who's interested in serving this particular population, I think, can be part of this conversation today. So, thank you.
I love them. And Lauren's my new best friend. Hi, I'm Dr. Nasinga Burton. I'm chair of the Mass Media Arts Department at Clark Atlanta University. I kind of have a hybrid identity, so I'm a bit of a public intellectual, I'm a filmmaker, a journalist, and a teacher. So I work with a lot of different populations. My area of expertise is the intersection of race, class, gender, and sexuality, which we now call intersectionality. I'm that old for a coined phrase. Which is awesome, because now I don't have to say, okay, this is this, this is that, but it's all together. And so the way that I came to this project is, I've written quite a bit in academic spaces about images and representations of Black women in various types of media, including social media, film, and news, and what have you, more traditional formats and the newer formats. And so one of the things that I was noticing, because as media scholars, even though we have this whole conversation going on about trusting the media and journalists and things of that nature, we actually are very well read. We actually have to watch television, which is why I don't even know how we remain intelligent, but we do have to do it. And so we actually are exposed to a lot of media on an ongoing basis, a consistent basis. And so what I was seeing as I covered these stories too, were a lot of high-profile Black women committing suicide, like Ricky Branch and Karen Washington. I was also, and that was in the news, in the Black media. What I was also seeing was, and watching television, a lot more narrative storylines with Black women, women in general, Black women specifically, dealing with mental illness, like Orange is the New Black, like Crazy Eyes, and things of that nature. Being Mary Jane, Dr. Lisa, who ultimately committed suicide, and things of that nature. And then I also, in terms of news, was seeing the number of high-profile cases involving Black women who were killed in police interactions, right? And out of the July, and just Sandra Bland, the folks I'm talking about, of 1 year, 5 of those women, 6 out of the 6 women who were killed in high-profile police interactions, 5 of them had mental illness, history of mental illness. So I started thinking about the reality of being Black, the reality of being a Black woman, this whole idea of the myth of the superwoman, right? This idea that Black women can stand all of these things, the role that media plays in either encouraging or refuting it. And so I started thinking more deeply in a more complex way about it. And so when Stephanie approached me about doing this book, I was trying to figure out what I would write about. And I thought about representations of Black women's mental illness and how to get away with murder, and Being Mary Jane, because I thought those were, top-rated shows. One is a network show, one is a cable show. They both had Black women showrunners, Shonda Rhimes, Mara Kill, Erica Shelton Kodish, who was the showrunner for season 4 of Being Mary Jane, is also a Black woman. And they also have a lot of Black writers on those shows, Black women writers. And so just really kind of interrogating this idea of the Black superwoman, what that looks like in fictional or entertainment spaces, right, like television shows, and how that impacts our interactions when we encounter police and other folks, in terms of people who don't necessarily engage with us on a regular basis. Like, all they get is what they see on television. And I'm just gonna pass this on, but I do have to make these 2 academic points. Most people get their information about people they don't know from television. All right, so be mindful of what I call your media diet. Don't watch television necessarily. Like, there's documentaries, there's lots of informative, important work being done on television and the media, but be very selective about what you take in. That's A. And then B, a lot of people say that the media is to blame for a lot of society's ills. It's hard to measure that because you can't control for a lot of other factors. So, for example, someone may be in a domestic violence situation not because they're watching, this whole thing with LaShawn McCoy play out, right? It could be because they've seen it in their household for generations. So it's hard to control for that. Like, you can't put someone in a box in a room. Well, you can, it's just unethical. You can say, let's keep them away from all their other influences and just show on television. Well, let's see. No parent is going to sign off on that. No parent is going to sign off on that. All right, so just be mindful of that. Even though you can't argue effects, because that's what we call it, you can argue for influence. So be mindful when you say that. And, because media, we're in such a hyper-mediated society right now, is very important. A lot of times we're just very dismissive of it. I mean, even having a PhD in the field, people are like, what is that? I mean, can I get that from watching movies on Netflix? I mean, you probably can. There's somewhere out here now that give you PhD for watching movies on Netflix, I'm sure. But that's not what I did. So, just be also careful and mindful and thoughtful about dismissing media, because it is very powerful. It does fly under the radar because it's so much a part of our everyday lives, like doing our phones out and our notes on it and stuff like that. And it is impacting us and influencing us in ways that we may not even be conscious of. So that's why I wrote the chapter.
Thank you. Hi everyone, my name is Carson. I'm the executive director and founder of Black Girl Smile, Inc. It's a nonprofit organization that focuses on encouraging healthy and positive resources geared towards young African American women. I'm also a 15-year consumer. I was diagnosed with clinical depression at 15. I turned 30 this year, so actually 15 years. And I can really relate to a lot of the things that these women are speaking about and that's contained in this book. It's been a journey to find a therapist, whether it's where I went to school in a relatively small town in Virginia, or even living in the big city of New York. It took me months to find a therapist that I felt that I could connect with, that understood my experiences, and was able to work with me in a positive and healthy way to help me along my journey. With my work with Black Girl Smile, and I also work with the Lee Thompson Young Foundation. Lee Thompson Young was, a huge crush of mine when I was younger. He was on Jet Jackson, was also on Rizzoli and Isles, and he completed suicide in 2014. When I moved back to Atlanta, connected with his family, who started an organization to promote mental health education in the Atlanta public schools. So some of the work that we do with Black Girl Smile and the Lee Thompson Young Foundation are things that we're talking about today. Self-care methods, coping skills, coming up with self-care plans, but also when we're talking about racial identity and femininity, talking about how our relationships, how self-identity comes into play in regards to mental wellness, especially when it pertains to young African American females. Even more simplistic than that is thinking about how social media plays into these things. When I'm going into the school system and I'm working with these youth, there's social bullying, there's these interactions that are very different from what a lot of therapists are accustomed to and dealing with. So us kind of connecting the medical community, but also to the social trends that are playing into mental wellness as well. But again, my big things are promoting self-advocacy, because when you're talking about mental health, it's very hard to get anyone help who doesn't want to get help themselves. And that was the thing that I had to get to personally. I had 2 suicide attempts until, as crazy as it sounds, I decided I wanted to live. And I decided that to do that was really going to mean minute by minute, second by second, focusing on my mental well-being and making sure that I'm putting myself in safe and comfortable situations, whether that's with family, whether that's with friends, whether that's in a job environment. And those are all things that each one of us has to evaluate on a daily basis of saying, is this going to be positive to my mental well-being? Because putting ourselves in detrimental situations, whether it's relationships, career-wise, those things can seriously impact your mental well-being, and then it can get passed down generationally. So I'm getting on my soapbox a little bit, but again, really promote self-advocacy, self-care methods, and coping skills.
Thank you all so much for really opening the door for, I think it's going to be probably the hardest topic. I think we should just throw it out there, and that's Black women and suicide. I think for everyone universally, just hearing the word suicide, even culturally, we think that it induces the idea of, or penetrates the mind when we say suicide. Nadia and I took the last 6 months, and if you all notice in the front, in the back here, you see Sister Speaks. It's the infographics that we created around suicide awareness with Black women in particular. So I kind of want to start there and also encourage people to pick up that infographic because it kind of gives a broaching approach to how you can introduce the topic with a friend. Not that you need to be the expert, but you actually need to just be able to say the word suicide. And studies show that you only have 1 to 2 questions that you need to ask, and you need to ask the right question. So with getting into that, I would love for our panel to address the idea and approach the question from that aspect of thinking about suicide, because sometimes we talk around it, we don't like to look at it, and then if it happens to our friend or family members, we really don't know how to bring it back into the room. If people have been hospitalized, and if I had a baby, people will come and visit me, but if I attempt suicide, no one is coming to see me. No one comes to visit me. So what happens, because I think that this book is great, but the idea that we're even balancing is precocious almost, because we're not even really doing a good job of balancing. We're either overactive and being too vulnerable as women, or alluding to too much strength, or we have absolutely no balance at all. So I think that, can we talk about it and just approach it from the suicide? And we also want to encourage people, if you have questions, start to raise your hand. I'm going to start to come out because the panel was really, really clear that they want you to engage as they're talking.
Well, very briefly, my chapter in this book has to do with from worthless to wellness. And I'm a survivor of several different types of violence. I wrote a poem, 6/11, 16, 19, 21. Those were all the times that I was attacked, either raped or molested, or different attackers. 6/11, 16, 19, 21. By the time I got to 11, I was like, okay, I'm done. This world is not for me. So I too had these ideas that I don't want to be here any longer. And it was an 8th grade dance teacher who saved my life, and it was getting into college and getting into counseling. And so as an academic now, the balancing strength and vulnerability came from Diane Brown and Vernon Keith's In and Out of Our Right Mind. That we have to, I'm a strong Black woman, and I've been vulnerable. How do we find that balance? And so as a researcher now, My vulnerability was to say, I don't know anything about mental health. I have my experience. I have my understanding of how reading Black women's memoirs and autobiographies have saved my life, literally, and given me strength and given me a whole panel of ideas, a whole palette of ideas of how to live well as a Black woman, right? That was the first idea that came out of Dr. Bell's survey, that inner peace is possible. I was like, what? Like, what? And so as a historian, looking at the ideas that, like Harriet Tubman, you can live into your 90s and start to surround yourself with this information. And I really appreciate that idea of self-advocacy, because, but you have to advocate for yourself and then also understand that you need help. So as an academic, my first act of vulnerability was to say, I need help in having this discussion in the way it needs to be conducted, because I don't know about the professional aspect. I know the personal aspect, and I want to surround myself with people who are equipped to have the discussion that needs to take place.
So I did my postdoctoral training at Emory University Medical School, and I worked specifically on a project called the NEA Project. I don't know if anybody's heard about that, and it's about Black women's relationship with suicide. And that was one of the places, other than just being a Black woman, of course, myself, that made me realize we've got to have our own literature about this. Because what contributes to suicidality in Black women is so different from the other populations. You will miss it. You will not only miss it interpersonally in your friends, clinicians will miss it in their clients, because what you're reading about suicide and the risk factors, it doesn't cover the things that Black women face, right? So even in my own, this isn't just anecdotal. I do the research, right? The PhD does something. I do the research, right? But research really shows, and for those of us who are in that literature of Black women and suicide, are two kind of central things for Black women are religiosity and relationships, right? We have to be the most collectivist, wanting to be partnered people out there, and also the most hallelujah Jesus, come on into my life moment people out there, right? So when it comes to suicide, for example, statistically, many of Black women's suicide is related to domestic violence relationships, right? It's not necessarily related to some of these other factors that are out there, right? So you have to address that relationship piece. So much so that even at the NEA Project, we had separate domestic violence groups. Even though this was about suicide, we had to go ahead and address the domestic violence, because 80% of the women we were seeing coming into Grady Hospital and ending up on that 13th floor were in violent relationships. The suicide came from the violent relationship. And he had the nerve to bring her to the hospital. He was standing right there. We're literally in the middle of that, dealing with the suicide attempt, but also dealing with what's triggering the attempt. Is often this attachment to an extremely unhealthy relationship. So there's that. And you also have to remember, and again, I'm not just making this up, I do the research. 80 or more percent, I actually think it's more than 80% of Black women claim to be something extremely spiritual, religious, something along those lines. I know growing up, suicide was not only not something that people gave, a lot of attention to, it was considered quitting, it was considered sacrilegious, it was considered blasphemy to even talk about it. That means you don't trust God, that means you didn't take it to the altar, whatever it was, right? And so these two things, the centrality of relationships and centrality of kind of spiritual understanding, I talk about that in my chapter. Here are these things, though, that are keeping us from not killing ourselves. I don't mean that as a euphemism, I'm saying not killing ourselves. Right? And if we don't understand that when we are working with Black women who may look healthy on the outside, because we have to, we can't afford to take off work. We don't have fainting couches, or I'm just not feeling, I just need to rest for a bit. We continue on because we have to. That's poverty piece, right? Or raising children alone piece. Right? So we can even come into our therapy situations pretending. We're even sitting across from the therapist. I'm doing pretty well, I have a lot to do. Sorry, let me turn my phone off. I'm in session, I'm still answering phone calls, I'm still, You know, even in therapy, but we're supposed to let it out. And it's, you know, and I say all this to say, for those of you who are working with Black women, you've got to keep that in mind. Like, how can I peek behind that mask? Because this woman who seemed really well put together, this power sister who was answering her emails and phone calls, might be suicidal and might complete this act within a week. And you'll say to yourself, I just saw her. She was just well put together and fantastic. Because again, we are experts at that. We are pressured to always present as put together and fantastic because we're representing all women and all Black people. That's burdensome. So in order to do that, we often pretend, and that weight, you know, in addition to the relationships, in addition to the fact that your family doesn't think you love God enough to live longer, right? The weight of representing everything Black, everything female, it can lead to these suicidal thoughts, suicidal gestures, and even suicide completion. And I really just, I know I'm going to pass the mic, but I really want to honor Miss Lauren here, because to even say that aloud, even at a place where you should feel safe like this, half of Black women don't even tell their therapist. Don't even tell their therapist that they thought about or attempted suicide. Right? And for you to share that in that space, the interesting part is the number of people that are thinking, me too. Thanks for saying it aloud, because me too. Glad to be here also. Just that sets us free.
I just want to pause real quick and just make sure that Dr. Bell's still alive.
Sorry.
No, don't be sorry. Sorry, not sorry. I just want to make sure as you're listening to her talk, if you have a question, make sure that you write it down so that we capture it. And even if this panel does not answer the question when you're coming up to buy their book, still get your question answered by someone. And also, Nadia is holding up this infographic that we created with the Black Women's Health Imperative. We really just want to pause and just make sure that we're being authentic to this moment and just understanding that you don't have to be the well-informed psychologist. You don't have to come across and have all the information, all the answers, but you can use the resources that are provided. And there's someone that thought about suicide this morning but decided to join us today. We're glad you're here. You know, there's somebody that thought about it last week, and we're glad that you stayed. But there's someone in the room that's still going to leave here and not get what they needed. And that would be unfortunate because we all are here. And again, this is supposed to be a safe space, but you know, we all co-create this space. So as we are walking around, we ask you to make sure, ask people how they're doing, how's their day going. Those things matter. You know, sometimes you don't realize that some people have not had a safe, interactive touch. You can shake someone's hand, you can ask someone if they need a hug, but just being very conscious of that, because the information that we're receiving, it's affecting me. I mean, as I'm listening to it. So just make sure that you're getting what you need, not in a very superficial way, but in a very organic way. Just know that we have the resources that point you in the right direction. You don't have to be the expert. You can be an advocate, but just need that information.
I don't want her. I'm in awe of everybody around me all the time. It's so fantastic. I was going to pass the mic because I don't really have anything to add. Like, I feel like you dropped the mic. So I'm going to go ahead. Unless somebody else picks it up. I know what to call it.
Well, that's going to be hard. Kind of going back to your question or your comment that there's some very specific questions that we can ask. There are. It's really as simple as that. If your spidey senses are going off, I know it sounds crazy, but if you feel that you're in a space with someone and they're not okay, but they're not telling you something, ask them what's going on. And ask them straight out, are you thinking of killing yourself? A lot of people are like, oh, is that gonna make them think about killing themselves if I ask them? No, it's not. Like research shows, personal anecdote shows, it's not. If someone is thinking about hurting themselves, they also don't have the wherewithal to hide it then from you. They're gonna let you know, yeah, I'm thinking about it. And then the next question that you need to ask is, do you have a plan? that doesn't, if they say no, that doesn't mean like, oh, okay, it's off my shoulders. I don't have to worry about it. But it means that there's not as high a severity, so you're maybe in orange, not red, but you're still past yellow. So you definitely still need to help that person get the assistance that they need. And again, that doesn't mean that you have to have an MD, a PhD, an LP, none of those things. You're literally, all you have to do is take the time to ask someone how they're doing and really wait for the answer.
I think it's a great, that's a great way to just bring about the idea that we all have this information. It doesn't take us having to activate it. And I think too, just being aware that if it's triggering for you, so if you know that the person might be suffering from suicide ideation and you also are suffering, sometimes it's hard for us to approach and be helpers when we need help. So that's fine also. But I think that as we talk about vulnerability, and we talk about the hyperactive side of that, and that kind of leads into codependency. And I don't think that we talk about, and this is a question for the panel as we're just talking about, how do you find, we're trying to achieve balance, but how do you strive and how do you get to a healthy place when you're only used to these codependent interactions and relationships, you know? And I think that, you know, there's so many parts of society that tell us that, you know, Black women, we have to be ride or die, you know, we have to go all the way out for everyone, like everyone except
I don't ride, I got questions.
Right. So I open it up because, you know, that is what a lot of our either millennials, our Xers, our boomers, we're all very groomed, I think, as women to be very nice and to make sure that everyone else is okay before we are okay. And I think that some of the signs of codependency we don't pick up on, you know, when we're forsaking ourselves financially, emotionally, physically, overextending ourselves. What role do you all feel codependency plays, or it kind of interacts with this idea of being vulnerable?
I'll try that. Codependency is essential to this idea of vulnerability, because as Black women, and this is where the gender piece is, and it's women specifically, and Black women in particular, do a lot of the heavy lifting in society. So for instance, you can be a homemaker, and anybody who stayed at home with a child for more than 2 hours knows that is hard to do, right? So people are like, oh, she gets to stay at home with her children, not thinking about, you know, what she's going through and what it takes, and you know, that constant attention that has to happen, that ability to, you know, come up with activities, the things that you have to do to get kids to where they need to go, and what have you. The bulk, 7% of Black women are raising their children alone, right? And so on top of that, it's like, okay, now we need you at church. On top of that, they're like, okay, and now we need you to run the office, and we know that so-and-so is out, but you can do the job with 3 people for about 3 months. You can handle that. Oh, okay, and so-and-so is sick, and so even though they have 4 brothers, we need you to take them into your house with your children by yourself and your 1 paycheck and take care of that person. Right? That is like how life happens for Black women a lot. And this is all empirical observation data for me and in my family. So I think you have to actively resist. You know, I will say I have a self-care day. Do not contact me. I have a 2-year-old. I adopted her. She's fabulous, y'all. Fabulous. And she's from Alabama. Yes, ma'am. I was all emotional in the car yesterday. I was like, my baby was born here. But anyway, yes. But I will, you know, hire someone, and, you know, I will say that it's privilege when you can hire someone and you have the money to say, listen, I need a spa day. And I really am an academic. People think academics are paid well. We just choose which 60 hours of the week we work, and then the other 20 that we write. We just get to choose what the hours are. And we are not paid well, particularly if you're in the humanities, which are, oh, surprise, driven largely by women. So my point is, you know, you have to make the decision, right? And so when I feel myself kind of coming to that edge where it's like, I'm going to cut somebody out and lose my job, or I'm looking at my schedule and I'm like, I don't see anywhere where, I don't even have time to go to the restaurant. You know, that's when I'm like, okay, it's time for a spa day. It's time for a staycation. It's time for me to go away. And I don't feel guilty about not taking my daughter. People try to guilt me into that all the time. You're not taking your daughter with you to Brazil? No. Who the hell wants to be on a plane for 2 hours with a kid to Brazil? Not me. And you're not going to guilt me into it. She's going to have wonderful, her life is fabulous because of me. So she's going to have many opportunities to go to Brazil with and without me later on in life. You know, if I'm here, she's going to be okay. So no, you're not going to guilt me into, oh, just bring Kai. No, because I can't drink and cuss and burn out the spades to run a Boston on your ass with Kai sitting on my lap. I can't do this. Okay, so to bring it back to professional studies, what I find is that I practice. I actually call it self-care. I put a sign up. I let people know nothing's wrong with me. I'm not missing. I've been kidnapped. I'm going off the grid, and I'm doing some things for me. And I think that helps, and that's being vulnerable. As a black woman, you know, as a woman in general, but as a black woman specifically, it's being vulnerable to be like, listen, I'm not driving these kids around this weekend. Listen, you got 4 other people in your family. One of them needs to come watch Granny while I go do this, while I take care of myself. That is vulnerable because people don't expect that from us because we're always like, oh my God, something happened. Let me take care of it. Oh my God. And you know, people like actually sit back. I've seen it. Yes. They sit back and wait for you to take it over. They just be like, they'll throw it out there and wait for some black woman to like catch it and make it happen. You know, and we have got to guard ourselves and we have to protect ourselves and our time and our interests and our mental health. So that's what I do.
Now this is fantastic. Yes! People start to rock. You know, it's like, yeah, well, girl, yes, like, yes, tell the truth. So, you know, I'm an Air Force brat, so I lived in several different places, and so books became my best friend. And reading Black women's stories has been really helpful for, in my chapter, there's specific points for self-care. And I'm looking at elders, nonagenarians and centenarians. Those Black women who have written their life narrative, who live to be 90 and 100, and 80, 90, and 100. They have things to teach us. So in the chapter, and thank you so much for bringing up Black Women's Health Imperative, because Linda Blunt wrote the intro for this book. Black Women's Health Imperative has wonderful resources. And one of those resources is the Index Us report, looking at healthy Black women. What does wellness look like for Black women? And so there's specific, I call them messengers of health, because I'm an acronym queen because I have a horrible memory. Meditation, movement, emotional support, nutrition, get help, rest, and say no. And Billy Avery says, say no. Billy Avery said no as a complete sentence. Billy Avery was the Black Women's Health Project founder, which spawned Black Women's Health Imperative nationally, and also the Center for Black Women's Wellness in Atlanta. At Spelman College, at Spelman College in 1982, you know, the first Black Women's Health Project. So all of these women, meditation, Anna Julia Cooper lived to be 105. She had a sunroom where she went to write. And even though she had brothers, and Anna Julia Cooper lived to be 105, she was born enslaved, and she earned her PhD from the Sorbonne at the age of 66. But she raised the 5 kids after her brother died. She's like Dr. Cooper, but all of the other brothers couldn't do it. She had to, but the way that she maintained was she had a sunroom. You meditate and you write, you have a space. The Delaney sisters did yoga. They started yoga at 60. Lived to be 107 and 109. Emotional support. Harriet Tubman. Everybody told her, her mother told her, her husband told her, her brothers told her. She escaped once. And then her brothers that she escaped with got scared and said, we got to go back. She escaped alone again. That's how she walked out the front door. She, having that emotional support, she had a relationship with God, where she talked to God and said, God said I should be free. You all say that I need to stay and be dutiful and things like that. Nutrition. Leah Chase is 95. She's a chef in Louisiana, still cooking in the kitchen. Get help. Debbie Roundtree just lived to be, she just passed. Civil rights attorney. She spoke about her grandmother, 104 and a half. Rest. Maya Angelou said that if you can't feel comfortable in your own self, if you can't find solace in your own self, then you're going to have problems. You need to rest. Can you sit still? Can you stop? And then lastly, Billie Avery again, she said, no is a complete sentence, because we say, and this goes to the codependency, right? No, I can't because. Oh, I can't. No is a complete sentence, just stop there, right? And so the messengers of health, that's part of the how do we get to what does wellness look like, and how do we learn from elders who have written their life story. So now I have 20 different ways to say no. No, hell no, thank you, no, oh, you should have no, absolutely not. No. So practice, but it takes practice, because we feel compelled as Black women that if we say no, then we're not, we have to give up our Black woman card.
Right. Well, we appreciate that. We have 3 questions, and I appreciate people writing down your questions. And it looks like if you have any other questions, you can hand them to Nadia in the back. She's collecting them. So the first question for the panel is, how do you get a woman in your life to open up about something that has caused them to act or be different, but they won't talk about it and they shut down? That's the first question.
So I think there's a few ways to go about this. The first way is to create a very comfortable and safe environment so someone feels like they can open up to you. You can also share various stories about your own life or experiences. There's a fine line with that. When you're trying to get someone to open up, sometimes they don't want to hear what you got going on in your life. But it also can be a positive when you're sharing when you're opening up, that may get them to open up as well. The other thing that I would say, pretty simple, is kind of keep trying and find different angles, find different ways to go about it. There's the option, if you're having like a one-on-one conversation with someone and they don't feel comfortable opening up with you, asking them, okay, so you don't feel comfortable opening up to me. Is there someone else that you do feel comfortable opening up to? Is there a friend? Is there a family member that you would feel comfortable opening up to? Because not only does that encourage them to continue to look for help, but it also indicates to them that like you're invested in their situation, whether they're getting help from you or they're getting help from someone else. The other suggestion is potentially asking them if they would be open to going to therapy with you, for you to, accompany them to therapy and to have that conversation. Because sometimes people like to have a mediator and to have someone where they can feel like, well, this person isn't going to judge me. This person isn't going to, they have no stake in this. They're just a neutral party. So those are kind of the 3 suggestions that I would, but definitely creating a safe and comfortable space so that someone feels like they can open up to you.
Okay. The second question for the panel is, why is it easy for us to admit stomach ache, illnesses, headaches, knee aches, etc., but we can't openly admit to mental illness?
Because nobody's trying to commit you when you talk about stomach ache or what have you. I think...
Can you define commit, just in case?
Oh, yes. Commit meaning that if you're in the middle of a psychotic break or some type of mental breakdown, you can be taken to a hospital, you can be placed on a 72-hour hold, where people will watch you and assess you, things of that nature. And that's the gist of what people think about. And that's what we actually see in media, too. Right? People who are having emotional breakdowns, they always end up in the room with all the white lights and the bright lights and the straight jackets and the what have you. And so you have all of these, this imagery that's kind of floating around about what happens to people who acknowledge their mental illness or who seek help. I just went with Halle Berry. She went somewhere and ended up in an insane asylum, and it was a horror place of horror. That is a common theme in movies and what have you. So when people say, oh, I have a stomach ache, someone might offer you a Tums or something like that. But if you say, I feel like I'm losing feel like I might hurt myself, I feel like I might hurt someone else, then, they may call the police. And, Black people, we don't want to call the police for lots of obvious reasons, brutality being one of them. But something might happen that actually will lead to you losing your freedom in some way, shape, or form, even if it is for 72 hours and for your benefit.
I think physical illness is considered out of your control, and we have mistakenly believed as a community, and I think even as a society, even on a macro level, that mental illness somehow is within your control. We tell anxious people to calm down. Wouldn't they if they could? What a strange thing to tell someone in a panic attack, you need to calm down. Thank you. I'm sure I would if I could. You don't think that's my desire. Or telling depressed people to cheer up. You gotta just cheer up. You got so much going for you. Thanks. That was actually not helpful at all, right? And what it communicates is that this is by choice. Even childhood disorders are considered that way. In the Black community, we've decided we don't believe in ADHD. As a clinician, please believe in ADHD. Okay, I'm just gonna say that and leave it right there. They do. Some of them do. So I think because we think this is all a choice, this is your child's behavior has to do with your bad parenting, or you're selfish, or you're greedy, or there's something something is wrong with you that you could control, and that's where mental illness comes from. That's why it is easier to say that you have a physical illness. And in the Black community, that's something important to think about when we work with Black folks, definitely down at Grady. I remember talking to interns and saying, now, Black folks will say no to having anxiety, but they'll say my nerves bad, right? They will say no to having diabetes. They will say I got sugar, right? Do you have hypertension problems? I'll take a water pill, right? There are these ways that in the community we talk about real things in more palatable fashions, right? And I think we have yet to I think we're working on it. Summits like this allow us to start to develop a language that's comfortable in different communities so that we can come out as depressed, so to speak. That's like the new coming out. It used to be coming out here, I'm now coming out with a mental illness. I'm letting people know that I've suffered with this. And some people have really had to pioneer that and caught a lot of backlash by coming forth and saying, hey, I struggle with this, right? It's an additional Me Too kind of movement just for people to get a voice and say, it's okay that this happened. And it's not. This mental illness is an illness, like any other illness. It is not drastically different from having diabetes. Well, some people blame folks for diabetes too, but the idea of a physical illness, a stomach ache and whatnot, is considered not your fault. But if you're having a depressive episode, if you're having an anxiety attack, people assume that it is your fault. And that is why we don't want to own it.
Great response, you all. So we have, we actually have 3 more questions, and we have no more minutes. To be honest. So that we can all get to where we need to go. I would encourage you all, as we are going to have the panel do some last minute comments, and if we can just address this, because I feel like this is a student who's asked this question, so I do want to make sure that this question is answered. But I will say the other questions out loud, and if you all can come over during our next break and engage the authors and get your questions answered, but I do want to make sure that this person gets. Yes, and so what's going to happen is the authors will be available right after this panel discussion is over. However, we know that there's a session happening at 1:30. So we would encourage you all to come back during the break just to make sure that everyone is able to, you don't feel like you're missing the session, you're not lingering over. So what I'll do is I'm going to read the last question and let you all respond, and then the people can come back during the break. Does that sound good? So the books are being sold for $30, just to make sure we're clear. The authors are going to sign the books. You'll be able to get those done during the break. And also, No More Martyrs is selling earrings in the back, and that's for $10. And also the t-shirts are $25 for No More Martyrs. So the last question is, how do you create positive spaces for millennial females in the college setting and to help students cope with mental health? And I think that's great, because we really haven't addressed millennial women in particular. So as we're kind of giving our last minute, our last time to kind of address that.
Well, real quick, just for, statistical sake, the people in college right now are not millennials. They are the iGen, Generation Z. We've gone to another generation that quickly, believe it or not. The average millennial is in their mid-30s. Believe it or not, some of you are like, I don't have millennials. You are, actually. You are. We kind of keep calling millennials. The reason why it's important, though, to identify why they're a different generation is because they're drastically different, right? As college teachers, these kids are different. I know that sounds like old lady talk. Right? But I am telling you, they are different from students of 10, 15 years ago. They are very, very different. The role of social media, the fluidness of their sexuality, the way they think about relationships. Just in 2005, if I asked my students, a group of women who want to get married, all the hands go up. None of the hands go up now. That was just 2005 to 2015. There's just a difference, right? Totally different generation. They also are kind of like, I can have it generation, right? And that I actually think contributes sometimes to a greater mental health challenge, because they think they should have it, right? I'm supposed to have it all, and I'm supposed to get it, and I see it. And sometimes it's frustrating as a teacher because they don't necessarily think you have to work for it, but it's given, and I think that's part of it as well. They also think things happen instantly, and in this kind of obsession with kind of instant gratification, suicidality actually reaches a peak. Because I have yet to learn the lesson of just withstanding frustration. The whole idea that joy might just come in the morning. Let me just hang in there. That's not who this generation is. It's instant. My phone is not fast enough. Nothing is fast enough. I can't even reheat this thing in the microwave because it takes 2 minutes. I'm going to stop it at 1 minute and eat it the way it is. You're laughing, but you know, right? You know. And because we're dealing with a generation like that, right? These people, I actually think you have to do more to look for these mental health things in this particular generation, because they are quick. They're quick and they're impulsive. Right? They operate at a different level. So when you see a hashtag that bothers you, and these kids will tweet about their suicidal thoughts, right? That's not a joke. That's not funny. Sometimes that is the one way they are reaching out. This is how they communicate. They go on dates with each other and text each other. On the date, I'm texting you and I'm sitting here with you. That's a different generation. The millennial didn't even do that. This iGen, Generation Z, this is a different generation of people. So they actually will talk about their mental health issues on social media. But it gives us an opportunity, though, to learn their language, like I'm saying, like they belong in a zoo, like they're different species. Right, but to learn their language, they speak totally in acronyms. Learn the acronyms, figure out, is this something what am I doing reaching out? That's how they reach out. They tweet about something and they put, that Snapchat is this long. I'm going to post and see who might catch this 10-second of video of me saying that I'm really in a dangerous place here. Who's going to see it in this 10 seconds? And so that is how we need to treat, I think, the modern woman, because she's using those avenues. I also think she's been inheriting these messages for too long about Black women not getting along and that kind of stuff. So this is definitely a generation of people. I don't have Black female friends. They're messy. They're jealous. I only have associates. Sister, no. No. Make friends, please. You must have them. You need a circle of women who you can call whenever, and it's got to be the ones you really can call. This is happening to me. I need you to come now. Nope, we're not talking about chatting on the phone. We're going to hang up, and then you're going to ring my doorbell in 15 minutes. Everybody's got to have 1 or 2 women like that in their lives. This generation especially.
So typically students do have organizations on campus. They can find out what those organizations are through campus counseling center and things of that nature. A lot of sororities, especially the Black Group Letter organization sororities, have a mandate and they're addressing these issues that affect college girls and women. So you can also ask them, members of those organizations, for guidance and what have you. And then at Clark, several of my students are creating their own organizations. I always encourage them, please encourage them to include, I always like to ask them, I said, call Dr. Bell, call Kanika, and they're like, who? Dr. Bell. But I always encourage them to include an advisor who has a background in what they're trying to do. So in college settings, if you don't have it, you may not know that you have it. Ask. Ask someone in the counseling center, ask someone in student affairs. You might need to start it yourself. And I'm sure there's a national organization that is available as well, and online communities for sure.
So I'll make this quick. Whoever asked that, please touch base with me, because I would love to chat with you a little bit further. A few things that I would encourage, you can check out the Steve Fund. They're doing great work, especially when it comes to minority college students. Again, that's the Steve Fund. You can also check out the crisis text line. A lot of millennial or iGen, you said iGen? I'm a millennial, so I don't know what the other one is. You can check out the crisis text line. A lot of people don't like to get on the phone, so you can text. I think it's 741-741. You can text help. I think that No More Martyrs is actually working on a partnership currently. Also, social media cleanses. Get off social media. Stop the comparison with social media. Because we're getting on there, even I do it. There's this entrepreneur doing this, or there's this entrepreneur doing this. I'm not doing enough. No, get off social media. Your journey is your journey.